Okay, thank you, everybody. Thank you for joining us for Season 2 of the Ranch Investors Podcast. This episode is special to me because our guest is Kim Bennett, and Kim Bennett happens to be my first mentor and trainer in the my appraisal career. So it's great to have her in here. She's been appraising for a while. I won't share exactly how long. I'll be gracious. But she's probably one of the most experienced and accomplished appraisers in the state. I think it's safe to say. So welcome to the podcast. We're glad to have you here, and we're excited to talk about the market, the current state of the market. Also, you do a lot of conservation easement appraisal work, so that's interesting to us. We want to hear about that, and I'm sure there's no shortage of things for us to talk about.
Yeah, we're excited to have Kim in. She is a heavy hitter in the industry of ranch appraisals, and she's fearless. She will take on the conservation easement valuations, which a lot of people want to stay away from, but she's fearless. And thank you for joining us, Kim. We're very excited to have you. Our listeners are going to get a lot out of this. So, Andy, are we ready to have Kim introduce herself?
Yeah, why don't you introduce yourself, Kim, and just give us a little bit of a background.
Okay. Yeah, so I'm Kim Bennett. I own Terra Western Associates, and I started Terra Western about 15 years ago, maybe 16 now. And before that, I was with Norman C. Wheeler and Associates in Bozeman for about 7 years, and had been on my own before that. And I have commercial banking experience, and a large commercial bank that did agricultural lending. And so I'm not afraid to say I've been doing this 37 years now, and it's really been a blessing of a career for me, and I've met so many nice people and had such wonderful experiences over the years. So yeah, it's evolved, it's changed, it's still doing that on a weekly basis right now, and just interesting times. So I'm glad to be here.
I need to throw in, Kim was an early and very enthusiastic supporter of Montana Land Source as well. So I've always appreciated that, because we got talking about this a little bit before we were recording, but disruptive technologies, disruptive products like Montana Land Source is somewhat. Not everybody out of the chute was so sure it was such a good idea. So Kim was always really supportive, and Kim's a progressive in that sense as far as Montana is a non-disclosure state, and obviously that's built into the market and whatnot, but the importance of, nonetheless, there needed to be a certain level of sharing and transparency for a market to function and whatnot. So
yeah, no, I agree with you, Andy, 100%. I was telling you guys before we started that when I first came here 30 years ago, nobody was, you really had to work hard to build relationships in order to find the data to do the appraisal work. And the difficult thing is that to do a lot of deals, you need an appraisal. And of course, in our market where there's a lot of cash buyers, we don't. But then those cash buyers later down the road will need an appraisal for estate planning or gifting or that type of thing. So we have to continuously add to our sales databases and create relationships with people that will share with us and then share with others when it's appropriate. And so in about 2010, we had a large buyers, two brothers that came into the state, and they were purchasing just an inordinate amount of property, and they were having everyone sign non-disclosure agreements, and so it kind of caught on, and so the market started acting that way, where we were getting more and more non-disclosure agreements between realtors and buyers and sellers, and so it's become more and more difficult to get data. And if you have relationships, typically down the road you can get the information you need. So it's just tough. But as appraisers, we do appreciate everyone. I mean, I know I appreciate everyone that shares with me, and it makes me have a more credible product. I have a more credible report. I can support what the realtors are doing in the market, the banks are doing in the market, and so it also gives us a better idea of trends and how things are moving within the market. So I appreciate when people can share with us, and I try to share with those folks that reciprocate or are kind about it.
I don't know if this has happened to you, Kim, but I've actually done appraisals for people, and then that property sells later, and that person won't share.
Correct.
With me.
That happens from time to time. Yes.
That's yeah.
Yeah.
Do you see that anything around that area where there were these non-disclosure agreements being signed for purchases of a new buyer, a big-time buyer in central Montana? Did that create a larger variance in values because without the information or correct, accurate information being disseminated properly, it left up assumptions of values. It left up unrealistic or illegitimate seller expectations because they really didn't know what was going on there. Did it cause a flux in the market in that area because people say, oh, we got this heavy hitter here. They must be paying out the nose for everything.
Well, no, because I think there was enough people that knew what they were doing and what they were paying. I think that at that time we were coming out of the recession, and what we saw then anyway were people that were coming into the market were doing due diligence again. During the 2004, 5, 6 time frame, there was so much emotional buying going on, so much ego buying going on, so much, recreational buying going on that people just were not doing any due diligence. If they saw it, they wanted it, and they bought it. And in that 2010, probably just up until the last 2 years, there was quite a bit of due diligence going on. They wanted to buy a property, it needed to be at the right price, and it needed to have a little bit of cash flow to pay some of the expenses. Now here we are again back in, right before the pandemic, we were starting to see some really odd stuff going on again. We were having the same thing where there was very little due diligence going on, and there was certain areas where values were starting to spike. And now with the pandemic, there's just very little. There's just no due diligence. People are just buying stuff. It's just crazy, So back then, I think what it affected was, if anything, it was hard to get enough sales data to prove that the market was stabilizing. So we had some lower sales, we had some foreclosure sales, we had, so we only can use what we have that's in the market. And if we can't get all of the comps, we can't just guess that sold for X, So we have to gather the data and kind of bracket it, and hopefully we have everything that we need to get it accomplished. But I think it was causing just a lack of data overall. That was the difficult part of it. But I don't think it affected market value so much.
So having just pulled together a presentation on the market and looking closely at the last couple of years, I can confirm that the last 2 years, the spike has started. Things were a little bit flat volume-wise, particularly, up until 2 years ago. It was a little surprised to see, confirming what you're saying, it was pre-pandemic. I mean, 2019 was a jump, and it's the same trajectory into 2020.
But, I'm doing
21.
I'm looking at paired sales analysis and sale resales and that type of thing. And when you get outside of some of these hotter areas like the Gallatin Valley, we're still not, we're seeing appreciation, but it isn't massive. I mean, we might have something that have sold 5 or 10 years ago for, $1 million, but it's a great site, has a river or whatever, and it might have doubled. We might have some of those one-offs like that, but
Right.
Most of these larger places are in that 6, 8, 10% appreciation. And what I'm doing is trying to use the most recent sales I have because it takes into consideration the market and what we've done. I'm trying not to go back more than 2 years right now.
Yeah.
So I don't have to time adjust that much. So, and we have seen some major sales, record-setting sales in some areas.
If all markets are cyclical and if history repeats itself, what are your projections for coming out of 2021? If we look back at 2006, Andy, as your data starts to decline, values and transactions volume starts to drop around 2006.
Took a nosedive, yeah, starting about 2006.
And so that was even ahead of Lehman Brothers.
That's right.
And the financial crisis. So that was almost like a pre-market indicator for the crash of some sorts. But yeah, I mean, if it's going to be cyclical and history repeats itself, regardless of politics, administration, technology, I mean, certainly it seems like we should be expecting a softening here in the next few years.
Well, for me, I look at a couple things. The stock market is a real teller about what's going on. When you start getting volatility in the stock market where it's going up and down a lot, and people start to get a little antsy and they want more hard assets on their balance sheet. And I think that's what we're into right now. We're starting to see people that are, they're just saying, look, now's the time. They're back in it again. And that's what we were seeing in 2006. People were really building up the hard assets on their balance sheet. So I think that's one of the things that affects it. And, I've been doing this so long that I can feel those cycles coming, or I can feel what's happening there.
Your bones start to twitch. You get a special twitch.
Yeah, I mean, I was like Andy in 2006, 2007. I was like, how long can this go? What's going to happen? And sure enough, something happened. But with this particular go-round, it's been very odd because it's like it feels different. It feels different overall. It feels like there's this pressure, and it's pushing and pushing. And what's happened now is we just have very low inventory of rural properties because before, what was happening before the pandemic and now with the pandemic and the urban flight and all of that. So everything that's coming on the market is just, if it's priced right, it's gone, and so there's just this pressure behind it. And when you go and you look at Montana Land Source map right now, and I know a lot of those properties that are on there, some of them are just not very high quality properties. So they're just sitting there and sitting there and sitting there. But anything with any kind of quality or, any B property or A property is just gone. And the listings are just not coming, not the kind that, we would like to see as far as larger ranch units. But I don't know, it's a tough time. And I've talked to other realtors and said the same thing that you just asked me, Coulter. When do you see this tipping over? And nobody can say right now for sure when it's going to tip over. I don't know what you guys are feeling. What are you feeling, Coulter? Do you see anything?
I would say because it's so multivariate and there's so much more correlations I want Andy doing for me. You bring up, Kim, another one that real estate, farm and ranch is not correlated to the equities market. It's essentially a zero correlation, but you brought up volatility. So could we get a correlation to the VIX, the volatility index? And Andy, in your presentation last week, you had mentioned that the majority of ranches are selling cash, which is cash buyer, which is night and day difference from the residential market, because right now people who were in a $370,000 home can get into a $530,000 home for the same payment because of interest rates. So that residential is highly driven by interest rates. We don't see that in farm and ranch because it's cash. What I'm feeling right now, I mean, there's all of those variables. You talk about low supply. Farmers and ranchers are a resilient breed. They're like coyotes. They can hang on no matter how bad things get. There's been a lot of COVID money relief. I mean, your farmers, 40% of their income last year was from the federal government, COVID bailout. So that'll extend their duration on the land a little longer. But the fact is that we have 10,000 baby boomers retiring every day for the next 10 years. They own over 85% of the land in the U.S. There's going to be a gray wave and a silver tsunami coming to where I think the listings, the supply that's not there today, my fear is that it all starts to hit at once, and that I mean that will be an abundance of supply.
And the expectations are likely to be high when they hit the market, even if there's a downturn that's evident.
Expectations are high, and that's going to conflict with needs. Their needs are going to be high because they're looking at long-term care facilities. They're looking at retirement, and so their needs are going to be high, but their expectations usually trump needs, and they're not going to settle for the first offer that comes in, and that might be to their disadvantage.
Well, it's interesting that you bring all that up, because one of the things that we were looking at before the pandemic was these age categories of people and what they're interested in. And, you know, for a while there, from 1990 on, there was this whole desire to have that ranch and have that piece of Montana and have that place where you could go with your family and recreate. And then it started to shift, and we talked about this over the last 4 or 5 years, that people that are in their 30s, early 40s, they just want to have a townhouse in Big Sky where they can just put the key in the door and leave and not have to have any maintenance or worry about it. But in the last year, what I've noticed is a lot of these buyers of these ranch properties are younger. So they've just decided, you know what? We can go, we want a social distance, we want to take care of our families, we want our kids to be, you know, not in high risk areas, and we can work from our home, so we're going to go ahead and buy a place. So so seeing some younger people coming into that market again, which I thought was a really interesting turn of events compared to what we were seeing before that.
There was definitely concern. I've heard older ranch brokers talk about being glad they're at the tail end of their career because they don't see the buyers. Mm-hmm. It was kind of you could call it maybe the millennial scare.
Right.
You know, millennials aren't going to buy ranches.
Right.
They just want to travel and have a townhouse.
Right. Instagram, just, you know, I'm part of the gig economy. The rental, short-term rental, I don't need to buy a second home.
So Coulter, can you sell Instagram photos to millennials for as much as you can real estate to boomers?
I'm not quite an influencer yet. I'm working on that, Andy. So
that's why we're here.
If everyone can go out and follow our Ranch Investor Instagram page, probably not the amount of clickbait you would expect from Instagram. I think it's a little more modest and tame, but no, I agree. Kim, do you think that these younger buyers, we'll call them Gen Xers, they're probably 45 to 55, they have kids and maybe some help from mom and dad who want to spend time with the grandkids out there. Do you see them being generational wealth, or are they new money?
Oh, very little new money. Yeah, very little. And so... and those guys seem to be buying the smaller tracts, you know, 640 acres and under, you know, where they can have a little bit of everything there, you know. But yeah, no, there's a few that have been self-made, but not very many. I'm working with one young guy right now that is, but it's just, yeah.
Well, that should be optimistic for us brokers then, because if consumer tastes and preferences are making it through to the next generation, that it is coveted and highly desirable to own a Western ranch. The baby boomer generation created so much wealth, it's going to pass on. And as long as the consumer taste and preferences pass on, the money's going to be there.
Well, we have some things happening in the market. So we have competing forces of assemblage, where you've got large ownerships that continue to assemble. You know, they'll take in their neighbors and neighboring properties. That's going on all over the state, actually. And then you've got this, you know, rural development close into larger population centers like Bozeman, Billings, and that kind of thing. So you have some subdivision and development going on. And then you have that mid-market where it's just a part-time farm and ranch or recreational investment type of situation. And those people are back online now. And as we were discussing before the podcast, we saw a point in time in 2006, 2007 where we stopped seeing things selling kind of on a $1 per acre basis, and people were just coming into the state saying, I've got $2 million to spend, I've got $4 million to spend, what do you got to show me? And so you just show them everything that's in that price range. And so what happens is you start having a site value for things versus $1 per acre, and because some of them just come back and you're just like, well, they paid $7,000 an acre for that. Well, yeah, they just wanted a $1.5 million site or a $3 million site. And so it's kind of flipping into that, you know, right now too. So most anything under 640 acres, I look at it from two perspectives. I do it on $1 per acre right now, and I also look at it from a site value. Would I pay X for that site? And so I think that's kind of probably been going on for the last 6 months, where we've been seeing that kind of flip change. And another thing I've seen, while there has been a lot of cash in the market and people paying cash, we do have low interest rates. And so I've seen some other people that already own land leveraging to buy other land. So, or leveraging to buy something somewhere else in the country because we've got lower rates on ag land too. So people are using their assets for different reasons now, where they'll come in and buying a big ranch, cash, and then the next thing you know, they need an appraisal because they're going to leverage it for something else. So that is happening.
It does drive you crazy as an appraiser. And I remember that in 2006, that site value thing. And these buyers would come in and, like you say, they have 1.2 million and they're looking at a 20-some acre place and a 200 acre someplace. Right. And they don't care. The 20 acre place has more creek or has a better view or is closer. And to, again, not doing due diligence at that time, they're both big. 20 acres is big, 200 acres is big. So not looking at it on a dollar per acre basis. And those shifts happen. And as an appraiser, tracking that stuff and modifying what you're looking at and what you're studying and what you're tracking can be difficult.
And we're in another market now where the traditional farm and ranch families are really competing against these buyers. It's really tough for them to add on. And in some areas in the eastern part of the state, they're not only competing against assemblage buyers, they're competing against NGOs and conservation groups that want to, add on and that type of thing. And that's affected the market as well. And when we went through the recession, we didn't see so much of a decline in eastern Montana, partly because of those pressures, and we had some good commodity prices during that, when we were coming out and all of that. And so that went really well. Right now, our commodity prices are kind of just hanging in there, and so.
Well, also, and conservation easements weren't really viable out east at that point so much. That's really come on in the last couple of years with sage grouse money and whatnot, right? I mean.
Right. I think the issue with the east and conservation easements was there was no sales data. So people were having a hard time figuring out how to value them. And so you have to get a little more creative when you're doing that kind of thing. Yeah. But now we're getting more and more data out there. And
because the common knowledge or what people thought at that time was there was no diminution in the east because there was not much development potential. Eastern Montana, for those that might not know, is kind of more open, less recreational, flatter, so it doesn't have that high end recreation market and development. So without having imminent development potential, the view was there wasn't much to take out with the conservation easement. But
well, the other thing you have going on out east is people in Montana are very property rights oriented. So when they find out they're going to have a partner in the land, they shy away from that. I mean, there was a couple parcels that went for auction out in the east, and they just didn't even get a bid on them because they had a conservation easement on them, and they just don't want to have a partner. And especially there's the stigma of having the federal government involved with your conservation easement too, and that's kind of going away now. People are starting to see that the easements are actually managed by a nonprofit land trust, even though there's federal funds involved with purchasing it. So there's two kinds of easements I work on, and about 60% of my appraisal work is conservation easements, and I've been doing them since 1998. And
they had them back then?
I am proud of mine. And so I've worked in both Montana and Wyoming on these, and I've worked on about 750,000 acres now. And so I feel pretty good about that. But so there's a donated easement, which is where the landowner actually donates a conservation easement deed, which restricts parameters and land uses. And when they donate those property rights to the land trust, then they can receive a charitable contribution if there's a loss in value associated with those rights. And then the other type of easement is a purchased easement, whereby the property is appraised before the easement and after the easement, and then the value of the easement is the difference between those two. And the programs that are out there, like the NRCS ALE program, Ag Land Easement Program, will fund up to 50% of the purchase of those rights. And then you might have some additional funds from like sage grouse money or private open space bond funds and that kind of thing that will pay a portion of up to 25% more, and then the landowner donates up to 25% of the value of the easement. So if you have a property that's worth, say, $10 million before, it's worth $7 million after the easement, the $3 million will be split between, as far as purchasing it, 1.5 million will be paid for by the federal government, and then sometimes they'll have additional funds in there. So those are the different types of easements that I work on, and they all have different types of supplemental standards for appraisers and that type of thing that you have to follow. But we see a lot of purchased easements in farm and ranch family environment. And
hasn't that kind of turned the perception a little bit too? Because some of these easements actually are being used by operators to enhance their bottom line. So
yes,
that it is a tool. It's been pretty controversial, as we all know.
Yeah.
In the last couple of years, but there are actually people using it to benefit in that sense.
Right. It's become a lot less scary for people, and they get the cash injection and can go on, or it helps with, transferring the lands to the next generation and keeping it in the family and that kind of thing. And the Nature Conservancy has been doing a lot of good work in the eastern part of the state for the last 20 years, helping families keep their ranches going and adding on and that kind of thing.
If the money's there, but it seems like purchased easements are rare. That
they're not that rare.
Like there's got to be a big pool of funds to pay for that.
Right, and the funding has been approved. They actually got quite a large amount this last go round. So
because like with Montana Land Reliance, every time, and I'm not throwing them under the bus because they've done amazing work in the Madison Valley and all across Montana since 1998. You probably worked with them first. And
they've actually been since
on.
1974, actually, is when they started.
And but every time I bring up purchased easements, we don't have any money, you should donate an easement. No, donations don't work for ranchers who don't need the tax credit.
Right.
Yeah.
So you just have to go into it with you're going to qualify for one of the programs, either a grasslands easement or a soils easement or that kind of thing. So, but I don't know of too many that they haven't been able to fund. I mean, if it's a right kind of a property, So get in touch with me and we'll visit about it.
Show me the money, Kim. And that brings up a conversation I had. Get your thoughts on, Kim. You've seen some changes from 1993, a river runs through it. That brought some interest. 2006 was, and let's talk about that market after this. And then today we're in the Yellowstone Kevin Costner era.
Oh my gosh.
We can define market periods by movies.
Yes, in Montana.
The Horse Whisperer. Yeah.
God, that is sad, but value judgments aside, highest and best use is always changing. And a conversation I had with a landowner was, and all of your owner operators are going to gripe about you can't cash flow land with cows and crops. Mm-hmm. Yes, that's been the case for many, many years. I understand that. And that's because the market values other amenities, other rights of your land higher than what the cows and crops can provide for value. Highest and best use is always changing, and I see it's really hard for us farmers and ranchers to digest and to accept.
Mm-hmm.
Practicing acceptance is so difficult. God grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change. But I think protecting the birds, clean water, having people out there taking photographs, enjoying horse riding, being in nature, listening to the birds, watching the elk, that is... I hope I don't get crucified by my farm and ranch clients, but that's the future of Western land ownership. It's not cows and crops, and we have to accept that, just like a commercial building Andy and I looked at in downtown Billings. At one time on Montana Avenue, highest and best use was street-level storefront retail. It then changed to kind of a manufacturing distribution after that area wasn't needed for street-level retail. And now, because of gentrification, highest and best use is probably condos, some sort of recreation-type bar, I guess. Wouldn't you say, Andy?
Yeah.
But definitely condos. And so that one building, maybe it's 100 years old, it has had at least 3 or 4 different highest and best uses. Mm-hmm. And it's so hard for us Montana ranchers to accept that the last 150 years of farming and ranching is no longer the highest and best use.
Yeah.
Don't you think, Kim, that just about every property in Montana has kind of a hybrid highest and best use of investment / production / recreation, and where the actual highest and best mix is, what the proper mix is in that. But don't most properties have those three elements rolled into highest and best use at this point?
Well, I'm so excited that I'm sitting with a realtor that's actually talking about highest and best use, because realtors just don't do that, right? So, because that is the driving piece of the appraisal process. You have to determine what the highest and best use of the property is before you can put a value on it, because that's going to drive what data you're looking at, and then the data drives what the highest and best use is. So you have to get that all right. So, probably back in mid 90s, something like that, I had a friend of mine call me from Great Falls, and he's like, "Oh my God, this ranch just sold for $1,000 an acre on the Front Range. What is going on? What is that? What is that? What am I supposed to do with that?" And I said, "Well, it's a new highest and best use. It's rural recreational investment." And so a lot of people have kind of poo-pooed the income approach over the last many years because of this thing that you were talking about, Coulter, where the agriculture income doesn't support the values that we're seeing in the market. But as you're moving west to east across Montana, and if you continue to do the income analysis, you'll start to see, you can see really early on when a market's going to tip over with recreational influences. And in the eastern part of the state, what we're seeing now is recreational stuff, because there's elk where there weren't before. There's elk in the breaks, but they're also coming out onto the plains a little bit more. And there's conservation groups that are in there that are wanting to preserve things. There's bird hunters that are out there hunting birds, elk, deer, antelope, all of that. So we're seeing that. But as you move across the state and you start seeing these capitalization rates start ticking down farther and farther and farther, that you've got another influence in that market. So I always do an income analysis on all my comps, because I want to see the trend line of that if it's happening. So you can tell when it's completely flipped over. Like I just did an appraisal in the Paradise Valley, and there was negative cap rates over there. So obviously, even on large ranches, they're not, so people are expecting a return on investment over time. That's where they're getting it, the appreciation. And most of these guys that are buying these larger ranches are doing long-term holds of 20 to 30 years. So they're bound to capture something. And to the highest and best use piece, there's the augmenting highest and best use and the complementary highest and best use. So that augmenting use is driving value. So if you're in the eastern part of the state, you might still have agricultural driving value, but you have a complementary use of recreation or recreational lease or something like that they're getting more income from, or they have a little timber harvest maybe in the southeastern part of the state or something like that. In the western part of the state, you might have a augmenting highest and best use of rural recreational investment with complementary agricultural income that pays the taxes and some of the repairs and maintenance and that kind of thing. So definitely seeing those flips in highest and best use. And then as things get subdivided down more and more, and closer to population centers, you're going into, part-time farm and ranch, you're going into the second home market, just different kinds of things like that. So the income approach is it's difficult, but it does help us.
Don't you think most operators, most farm and ranchers that you brought up, Coulter, that still want to stay in the business, need to look at the land as a separate investment? It's an investment in and of itself. It facilitates their operation. But, the analogy I use, and you brought up commercial on Montana Avenue, say we were going to do a boot shop down on Montana, and you find a tract you like, and it's the price. You're never going to buy that piece of land with your boot business, but you're looking at that piece and you think it's a worthwhile investment in and of itself, and you say, you know what, I'm going to buy that lot because I'm bullish on owning that property, and I think that's going to be a good investment, and I'm going to have a boot business in that building at the same time. But I think that's what's happened in the rural land in Montana. I think just about every property in Montana if you were going to come up with one highest and best use, you might have to say it's an investment, highest and best use, because everything we've been talking about, the production itself doesn't pay for the land or at very low cap rates, but Montana land has appreciated. We've talked about, cycles of dips, but nonetheless, on the whole, Montana land
Since
is a
the
good
80s.
investment over time. So investment is really kind of the dominant highest and best use. And I think you're right, Coulter, some farm and ranch operators still struggle with that reality. They do and they don't. I mean, they sure see the value of land, and especially when it comes time to sell.
Right. They try to attach land to the business. They try to see land as a tool or a machine of the business, and it's not. It's its own investment that has a longer hold period, a longer investment horizon. It doesn't depreciate like your cows and equipment. It doesn't cash flow. You're not going to be able to improve your cash flows that much off of land, maybe 30% if you're a rock star, but you can improve your cash flows from tractor work. You can improve your cash flows from better cows, better management of that operation. But yeah, the paradigm is still stuck that the land is part of the business, and it's not. It's an independent investment.
Yeah, I would agree. It's growing on. It just does its own thing. If these folks are debt free, then they can do what you're talking about. They can really manage their operation in order to get the return they need. Anytime you start having a large debt associated with an agricultural operation, that's when we have debt servicing issues. So, but we're just in the grips of that. And I've been changing from my highest and best use from rural recreational investment on some of these to just rural investment. And even though people still recreate on it, they see that it's right next to this area that's just going to, blow up or something. So they're buying it. It's just, like these things are changing.
Yeah, and it's so qualitative and values driven, and it's so hard to adjust to change, and it's difficult when feelings are involved because people don't like the thought of losing their identity, and this transition of highest and best use is a loss of identity to a lot of.
Yeah, that's a good point.
I totally agree with you on that. It's tough. No, that's a very good insight.
Well, as usual, this has gone by lickety split, so we're getting close to wrapping up time here. Any last thoughts? Any last comments that we want to get in here before we wrap up our episode?
Well, I'm just really interested to see where this goes over the next year. Just to see how it plays out, and just hang on, see how it goes. It really is about supply and demand right now. I think we just don't have the supply, and the demand is continuing to get high, and so we'll just have to see where it goes.
Yeah,
Thank you.
I agree. I mean, we're not out of COVID yet, but it kind of feels like maybe that market influence is waning or should be waning, but we're not seeing any slowdown in our market. So it'll be interesting to see what carries forward.
Yeah, we have summer coming, so it'll be interesting to see.
Yeah, well, it's a real strong start of 2021, that's for sure.
Lots of good data points, Andy, for your covariance of correlation analysis. I mean, now we've got the VIX. We need the M2 money supply because of these cash purchases. We need gold correlations. So looking forward to that data.
Barometric pressure, Zodiac.
Kim, this has been amazing.
Thank you so much,
truly
Kim.
my pleasure to finally meet you. Appreciate you reaching out
thank
this
you,
summer
Coulter.
to talk
Thanks,
and
Andy.
get some buyers taken care of, and hope to do this again. Thank you.
Yeah, you're very welcome.
Before people turn off their podcast, how can people reach out to you and get in touch with you if they have?
Sure. They can.
What are your services and what are you offering our listeners?
Yeah, they can go to terrawestern.com, TerraWestern.com, and that's my website. It has all my contact information on there and all the services we provide. I do appraisals for just about anything. So, and my phone number, is that okay to give out?
Yeah.
Okay, 406-932-3067.
And fair warning, Kim is in high demand. Just be aware.